Hello, my friends. I'm so happy that you're here. You know, when you picture what your family is going to look like and what life is going to be like, and you get to check all the boxes, and then one day it feels like everything is turned upside down. And that's exactly what Reina, who is our guest today, felt like when she found out that her son was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma. It was kind of disguising itself in a bunch of different ways before they were able to get a diagnosis. And Reina walks us through what that process was like. But for Reina, her point of joining me on the podcast today is that she felt like she had a lack of tools and education on how to be properly supported herself and how to talk to her child about things. And so because of that, she has started almost a publication. And because of that, she has written her own children's book and plans to do more of them. And you can see her at Hello Brave Co. There are some special parts of this podcast episode that I want you to pay attention to. One is Reina's ability to reflect on the past and have it impact her future and what she's learned about herself and communication. And the other is the close attention that she paid to supporting Elliot throughout and how that changed throughout the process. Thank you so much for being here, and I couldn't be more honored to share another family with you today so that other families can feel less alone. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here.
I'm Reina, and I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee. We've been here for about 5 years, but I'm originally from the West Coast. My husband and I both are. I come from a big family. I'm one of 6, number 5 of 6. So that made for an exciting and interesting upbringing. And my husband and I met when we were 18, and we've been married for almost 16 years. And in 2013, we had our son, Elliot. We had always planned on having one kid, and I always hoped it'd be a boy. I wanted a little boy. I wanted him to be named Elliot, and I had it all planned out. It was perfect. and
that doesn't usually happen.
But for me, it was going to. So, so we had Elliot, and at the time I had a bakery, a specialty bakery in Tacoma, Washington, that I did that with my mom. And then my husband was in grad school and he was headed down the academic route, and I knew we wouldn't move back. So we sold the bakery when Elliot was 1, and we had an exciting life. We moved a lot because of my husband's school and then job. And then we moved to Nashville in 2019. And the last 5 years have been incredibly difficult. Elliot, it didn't go as planned. When he was 8 years old, he was diagnosed with Burkitt lymphoma. And I'm not sure where to start with that.
Thank you for letting us know a little bit about what got you there. Because I think as parents, especially just when you enter parenthood, it's easy to forget like who we are as people. And you have this whole kind of life that experience of having a bakery and having a marriage and moving all around before you were brought to the experience of what happened with Elliot. And just knowing that you're close to the Vanderbilt Hospital, the Monroe Children's Hospital, there's an incredible child life team that I know about there that does a lot of research and everything. So I'm very excited to talk with you about that. But I think let's start with kind of what brought you into finding out that something was going on with Elliot.
Sure. So in 2021, Elliot had COVID for the first time in September. And, you know, he was sick for a week. He was on the couch for a week, but I didn't take him to the doctor. It was nothing severe. And then he got better, but he sounded congested. And that went on for a few weeks. And I was kind of like, that's weird. He's better, but he still sounds congested. And that went on. And then his teacher said something too. And they were wearing masks at school at the time. And she said, I'm having trouble hearing Elliot. I wonder if we should do a speech therapy evaluation. And I said, oh, I think that's a great idea. We're having trouble too. And there's some words he's not pronouncing. And so he met with the school speech therapist and he came home. He came bouncing out the door and he said, Mom, Miss Lauren said my tonsil's really big. And I thought, oh no, he has strep throat. So I took him to his I didn't look in his mouth. I took him to his pediatrician the next morning for a sick visit, assuming it was strep throat. We'd get antibiotics. We'd be on our way. And I'm talking to his doctor and she's looking at him. And then she asks him to open his mouth. And then she just pauses and she turns to me and she says, come look. And I'm not good with bodily fluids and all that. So I was like, maybe I'll look for a second. And I only looked for a second, but his left tonsil had been grown so big, it almost covered his whole throat opening. And there was a white mass attached to it. So she immediately was calm and she said, I'm going to make some phone calls. And she sent us to the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital and we saw an ENT. And the same thing happened there as soon as he opened his mouth. And they were like, okay, we're going to treat it like a tumor until we know otherwise. And you're going to get a CT scan. We did that night. It all happened very quickly. And by the end of the CT scan, we knew it wasn't fluid. It was a solid mass. And I kept hoping it was COVID. COVID did something weird. COVID does weird things to lymph nodes. And I held on to that really tight. And they said, okay, we're going to remove everything. So they scheduled him for surgery to have a tonsillectomy. And that was a week later. That we couldn't get in until a week later. And so by the time that happened, we were told, we're going to do the surgery and then we'll send it to pathology and you're going to know in about a week. So that's how I was mentally prepared. And surgery was with COVID protocols, which were incredibly difficult. It was a very unpleasant experience when we had to do that surgery with him because he was still testing positive for COVID, even though he was not, I can't think of the word.
Symptomatic anymore. He didn't have any of the things.
Yeah, he wasn't contagious.
But you can test. There's so many things of COVID that just keeps popping up in life. And in 2021, it was still a scary time.
It was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had to do that. And that was very difficult. And then he went in for surgery and it went longer than expected, which of course, then my heart starts racing more than it was. And then the surgeon came and got us and she took us to a room and she said, the mass was bigger than when it was when he had the CT scan a week ago. So it was harder to get everything. And she said, because of what it looked like, she had a frozen sample sent to the lab while they were doing the surgery. And it came back immediately as abnormal cells. So we had that TV moment in the room and it was very awkward to be her as I was wailing and she just sat across from us. And so that's how we knew. And we didn't get it officially diagnosed until another week later when pathology came back and we had the official diagnosis of Burkitt lymphoma. But that was how it all started. It started in his tonsil and then the ball went rolling very quickly after that.
And so quickly because his speech changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because and it sounds like he's the kind of kid that really wasn't complaining about chewing or eating or anything like that. When a lot of parents talk about kind of like this out of body experience that happens when you get that kind of news that's delivered in a side room of a waiting room. And you're thinking, I didn't even know this door opened up to the room, but if now I'm sitting here, now these words are being said to me. Did you have that experience?
Yes, I did. It was just so primal. It was just this, being a mother and someone my immediate thought was, I'm going to lose my son. That was where my head went immediately. And all I kept saying was, I just don't understand. I just don't understand. And I had to call my mom. She was cat sitting for us. I mean, she knew. She flew in. She's from Washington State and she was at our house and I had to call her because we all had so much hope that it was just going to be COVID. They'd take it out, would be done. And I remember talking to her sobbing and she just said, what do you need? And I said, I just need to see him. I just need to see him.
Hug your baby, for sure. Another thing that you kind of explained to me when you wrote in the form was this like time standing still type thing. It's like you're acutely aware of every single second that passes in an hour when you're waiting on this life-changing information, and it moves so slow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is amazing. When we were in cancer, time, the whole experience moves so slow. And it really wasn't that long. It was like maybe 6 months total, which doesn't sound that long, but for me, it felt like 10 years. And then when I'm living normal life now, it's like, oh, a day passes, a week passes. But when you're in that, you just feel it. You feel every second.
I got introduced to you, Hello Brave Co., you, Reina, because of these incredible children's books that you're, starting to write and publishing. And we'll kind of talk about those at the end. But what seems is you were really paying attention to the words that you were saying to Elliot and the way that you were delivering information to him. Did that start as soon as kind of that like ENT visit and surgery that you were kind of thinking about, okay, how is he going to take this information?
Right. That's how I've always treated him. And because he's a very anxious person like me, he's a very highly sensitive person like me. And so I have great empathy for him. And sometimes it's mostly a good thing and sometimes it's not. And when it's not is when I'm thinking I can only handle so much. Therefore, he can only handle so much. So I don't give him enough credit often. And when it's like, no, he needed to hear more. He needed to hear more of the truth, when I was trying to just give small pieces and like, let's not go down all those avenues just yet. But it's hard to know. It's, in hindsight, it's like, oh, I wish I would have handled things different. But I think anyone would say that. So yes, but I was always very careful. We already had a therapist for him. We hadn't seen her in a while. I called her immediately and I said, help. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to talk about this. And it was helpful, but it's still hard when we were all in the room together and I'm thinking, well, he needs to know his hair is going to fall out. How are we going to tell him that? I bought a couple books. There's a book, When a Kid Like Me Fights Cancer, and I could barely read it. And it was so hard. And it was hard to say the word cancer. And it's just such a process at the beginning. Yes, but I was definitely very mindful of how we talked to him. And a lot of times I would tell the doctors or nurses or whoever and be very explicit about, I don't want this said in front of him, or can you pull me outside if you're going to talk about this? Because I knew it would be too much for him. So that was really important, and to advocate for him from day one, because doctors will just talk. And I'm thinking, oh, please don't say that in front of him.
Right. And nothing against doctors. Oh my goodness. They're the ones who help us get through this, but it's so true. They have a job to get done and want to communicate it in a way that's effective and don't always know the nuances of the child's personality, the parent's personality, what have been agreed upon maybe before they walked in the room. So this advocating that you've done from the beginning, getting a team of people around him, to even have the foresight to like call a therapist or think about advocating for him in this way really makes you such a special mom. It's really, really impressive. Okay, so you get the diagnosis of Burkitt's lymphoma, and how do you notice yourself kind of going through the motions and finding out what needs to be done? How did you cope with the experience?
I would say I didn't cope well. And by that, I mean, I'm a very anxious person by nature. And when I feel that anxiety, I get cold and I go inward, and I didn't want to talk to other people. I just wanted to be by Elliot's side 24/7. And that was it. For me, it was just, I just want to be there to care for him, to comfort him. I also wanted to be in control. So I took all the phone calls, every doctor, everything came to my phone. And so I was living in that very anxious state the whole time, because when is someone going to call? What's the next news? Because we got initial news and they thought it was one stage, and then they did more testing, and then it got to be a different stage. And taking that call And I just remember sitting on my steps, just sobbing. But then I have to go back inside and I have to stop crying and I need to be strong and be there, be calm so I could be there for Elliot. So all that to say, by going inward, by becoming this stone cold person to everyone except Elliot was really hard on my relationships, mainly my marriage. And, I look back and I was like, that wasn't fair that I did that, but that was how I was surviving.
What's really impressive is the reflection that you have and the ability to see what happened. It's hard to put to words. I don't think I've been able to do it, but I very much identify with this. Like when I'm anxious, I'm cold as stone. Mm-hmm. I'm very agitated. I don't speak to anyone except for like what I want to control and what's happening. And I don't think I've ever been able to state it in the way that you have when you're kind of thinking back about what you've reflected. And gosh, we probably all have these moments where we look back and think like, ooh, I could have done that better. So it's impressive. And I think, giving yourself some grace and others who are listening who've acted in the same way, that you're in survival mode. Mm-hmm. There's no time, truly. You're literally going from the worst case scenario to the worst case scenario to the worst case scenario and trying to get through it all and comfort your child.
Right.
About that support system and maybe how you came to the light of really identifying that maybe the way you were coping with everything wasn't working or wasn't serving you in the way that, to make you just kind of the awareness of it all.
Yeah. So as far as support, I have a big family, like I mentioned. I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and we are all over the country. But when something big is going on, they show up. Everybody shows up. And I felt incredibly supported by my family. My mom flew out immediately and she stayed with us and she just was present. And she did laundry and she cleaned and she was just there in the best way, in the most comforting way. And then my siblings, one of my sisters is a doctor, and I tell people I don't know how anyone goes through cancer without a sister that's a doctor, because she was invaluable. She explained everything to me. She helped keep me calm, or she's not an alarmist, or she knew when to keep things from me. I guess in the same way that I knew when to keep things from Elliot. She knew, when to not tell me too much. And she explained everything. I had her on the phone. We did 3-way calls anytime I was talking to the doctor so that she could hear it, because I knew I was not going to absorb it. So she was an incredible help and a huge support. I texted her daily because every day so much happened. So I would reach out to her and this is happening and send her some medical jargon. And she's like, okay. And she had access to Elliot's My Health. So she would look at all the lab reports and she would say, okay, this looks a little high, or this, this and that. So I knew before the doctors did rounds kind of what we were looking at. And that was very helpful. So she was an incredible support. And the rest of my siblings, they just wanted to support me and Elliot, of course, but they did that in the ways they knew how, whether it was sending something or just sending really kind, supportive texts, because I didn't have the bandwidth to keep in touch with everyone. And that was my sister's other job, was she kept everyone informed because I couldn't. So I knew they had their own group chat and she kept everybody updated. And Elliot was at a small private school at the time, and his school community really showed up for us. And that was really beautiful. And my sisters had started a GoFundMe and there was so much support there. So we didn't have to worry about the financial burden that we were facing. And we could really just focus on being there for Elliot. And the school did a lot of kind things. And we hit this through all the holidays. It was right before Halloween. So it was Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. And we were, being 2021, we had COVID. So we were really locked down. But his classmates came by our house at Christmas time on the little bus, and the principal was there, and they sang Christmas carols as we were all on the lawn listening to them. And they had a banner that said, get well, Elliot. And it was just so beautiful. And the way in which people show up is not only something I won't forget, but something that I want to pay forward and because I know what it's like to receive. So I want to give that back when I can.
As you're going through something so difficult, sometimes people can have a hard time with knowing what to do. It sounds like if I'm not doing something heroic for them, I might as well not do anything. But it sounds like from your experience, these little text messages, like something, set up a GoFundMe. Like, first of all, I always ask the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand and we could do anything, what should we do? And I think we get everybody who's going through cancer a sister who's a doctor, because that sounds amazing.
Yes.
And maybe your sister specifically, because she sounds fabulous.
She is.
Oh, I'm curious, you said one of your fears was, how do we break the news to Elliot that he's going to lose his hair? And how much of your fears and misconceptions about how is this going to go, how did it actually go? What was the reality when it was actually time to have those types of conversations?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to dig back to those memories because some of it's a bit blurry, but I do recall very vividly when he started chemo. And that first day, he had to have intrathecal chemo. So that was the start of each round. So he was put to sleep and they did the bone marrow biopsy. They did a few things. They put in a PICC line and then immediately we were transferred to his room. And so that day, that was a big day. He woke up with his PICC line, chemo starting, and the doctors came in and they said, okay, we're going to run through all of the side effects. We're going to tell you all the chemo that he's on and we're going to tell you all the side effects. And I had talked to Elliot before they came and I said, do you want to be here? We can totally talk about this in the hallway. You don't have to hear it. And he said, no, I want to hear it. And I really wanted to honor his choices anytime we could. I didn't think that was the right decision, but it was what he wanted to do. So it's like, okay, let's do that. And so they went through everything and he was very stoic. He's a very stoic kid. And as soon as they left the room, he just let it all out and just sobbed and cried for days about it. And he was so scared and he's already prone to being self-conscious. And the thought of losing his hair was more than he could handle. And he was worried, what will I still like him or love him if he's bald? And what will other people think? And he never got over that because he always wore a hat. He never wanted anyone to see his head without hair, which we always respected too. He did get to be himself around us, which I was grateful for, that he felt comfortable. I think we had a psychologist that worked with us and she helped us and she said, why don't you frame everything like an experiment? And is it after the experience, whatever it is, you say, was it better than expected, worse than expected, or as expected? And we started doing that with everything. And we still do it to this day because that's really help his brain rewire a little bit because he's prone to just being very negative. And so everything, it's always the worst day. It's always the hardest thing. And over time, he has been able to say a couple times even that was better than expected, whatever it was, whatever the thing he was anxious about. But a lot of times it's as expected. And so tools like that have been really helpful in getting through those things.
And sometimes that's so heightened and takes so much work that once it's over, you just want to take a deep breath and forget.
Exactly.
And that post-processing of how did it go? What was it like? Was it what you thought it was going to be? It's so helpful. I love how she framed that for you. One of my other favorite tools is even in the preparation to talk about, when this is done, what are we going to do to get through it, or what are we going to do afterwards, showing that there is an end time to this, because sometimes it feels like it can live on forever.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Getting Elliot's PICC line removed, he worried about for months ahead of time, basically like right when they got it in. It was, how are they going to get this out? And that built and built and built. And by the time when it was time, he didn't want to let it go, but it was like, we have to remove it. And that was incredibly difficult. We did take a video of it. I haven't watched that video in a long time, but he's closing his eyes and we had so much support. We had his child life specialist, the psychologist, an extra nurse. When I was ready, I had music to play. I had all these things ready to go. And then the nurse did it, and he's, eyes are tightly closed. And then he's like, is it done? Or, something. And she's like, oh, it's done. We're done. And it was.
I know the buildup of these things. It's so true because things get in and it's like, okay, well, how are they getting out? It can be as simple as an IV or like a PICC line, a port. Yes, because this is a thing that can forever.
Right.
What are some of the things you've learned about yourself during this process? Maybe you didn't know before.
I mean, I've definitely learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. That is for sure. I was a very shy child, teenager, adolescent, and tried to keep my world really small and not ruffle any feathers and just kind of exist quietly. And I couldn't do that through this experience, or I didn't want to. I had to do everything I could to help him navigate knowing his personality and how his brain is wired. And it was like, this isn't a typical kid. And we all need to accept that. And when things might seem easy for other people, and I know they're not for him, and how can we support him? So I definitely found my voice a little bit through this, and just that I knew I was willing to do anything for him, but then you put that in practice. And I wish I could have taken it away and I was the one dealing with it, but I couldn't do that. So the next best thing for me was to be that support and make those extra phone calls and emails. And, it was like, okay, we've got this coming up, or this, like, how can we plan, like the PICC line removal? And I met with his doctor and she understood him and she was wonderful. And I said, what can we do? Is there a calming medication we can give him right before? Or, what are the options? Let's talk through this. So I definitely found my strength in my voice, and I never want to go through cancer again.
Either. What a beautiful model for Elliot to watch you be such an empathetic, empowering advocate for him and helping him find that in himself. And for you too, I've had some families tell me that after their hospital experience, whatever it would be, it's like they look at the world differently too. Like, oh, I can actually advocate and ask for what I want in my job when it comes to Elliot's school or whatever it would be. So you truly found, I think, at least I think that you're quite creative as well. And if you were a baker, I'm sure you kind of have that artsy background to you, but you've started developing these books, and you allowed me to read the first one about lymphoma, these children's books that are, I would say, I don't know if this was the intention, but like very much meant to be a collaborative experience between parent and child to read together. And a child could read it on their own, right? If they're a reading age, I think probably 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, if they needed to. But it's kind of meant to be, the book itself looks like a conversation between the Hobie and the child with cancer. Was that your intention? Is that what you wanted it to look like?
Absolutely. Yes. When we started this, it was totally born from my experience with Elliot and just not having the resources. I have to give so much credit to child life specialists, and our child life specialist, Annie, was amazing and is amazing every time we see her. She was the only oncology child life specialist. It was just her, and it was COVID, and she could not be everywhere at once. So we were pretty isolated, mostly due to COVID, and all the playrooms were shut down, and the staffing was so short. And so I just felt like I needed a resource. I needed something to be able to talk it through, to give me, the parent, the words, because often I didn't know how to say it or what to explain, and then give the child. To me, I feel like when there's a book about it, that means you're not alone. That means other people go through it too. So immediately I feel like it's this, oh, it's not just me, because there's a whole book written and published about this.
So true. And my daughter had a burn on her face a few months ago, and we got a book, it's called Sarah's Steps, and she has a burn on her face. And it was this aha moment of like, oh, there's this book. Like, this happened.
Yeah. It's very powerful to lessen that feeling of being alone and the only kid in the whole world that is going through this, because all of your peers are healthy and living their typical life. So yes, so these books our vision is that as soon as you're diagnosed, this first book is lymphoma because of Elliot, but we have leukemia coming right up, and we have so many more that we want to do. As soon as you're diagnosed, this book is placed in your hands, and it gives parents and children a way to have that conversation that is so hard. And it's a way to watch someone else. In this book, it's Charlie and Kobe having this conversation. So you can kind of be a bystander and let the child take in what they can. And, maybe you read it in pieces, or maybe you just read it a few times. And in order to really let the child understand, and another big goal is for them to be a part of the conversation instead of this just happening to them. And that is absolutely what happened with Elliot. This was happening to him. He didn't feel involved or connected even with the ways we were trying. And this came out much later when he was in remission. He suffered a pretty severe depression about a year after he was in remission. And what he remembers is that he was completely unaware and he didn't know anything. And he woke up with this PICC line and no one told him that was going to happen. And so how his memories are, and I just realized we didn't reach him. We didn't connect in the way he needed connection at the time. And so that was a huge catalyst for these books, is maybe this will help a child understand more and not have to have that type of trauma.
Control what his memory of his experience is going to be like. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right, taking a look at that connection piece. I'm just thinking about, oftentimes in the hospital, things tend to happen pretty fast and it can feel like a snowball of information. And it's hard to know, what do we focus on making sure he knows or she knows before this happens? And oftentimes sometimes you can tell them and they still are not processing it, just like us, right? We can sit there and talk to a doctor for 30 minutes and retain only about 10% of what they've said because you're just not taking it all in. So, the book is fabulous. How can people follow you, learn more about your books and what you're creating?
Yeah, so we have a website. We are hellobrave.co, and we're also on social media at Hello Brave Co. So those are the great places to find us, and you can see what we have available. Right now it's lymphoma. We are days away from getting leukemia wrapped up too. And so we will post links of where you can find them. We did a Kickstarter campaign and we raised money so that we could print books to send to hospitals. So we are going to be printing lymphoma and leukemia and sending them to children's hospitals around the country so that they can have them in hand. We want these books in hands. And so that's our plan. But we'll also we have an ebook on Amazon and you could purchase it on Amazon. But really, we just want the kids and the families that need it to have it.
And creating such a beautiful resource. We look forward to sharing it with whoever reaches out and asks for something like this. It's so much of what we want to do at Child Life on Call is like, we have parents and child life specialists have so many resources, but how do we make sure everybody's getting access to everything? And so your books will absolutely be included in that.
Thank you. And that is the goal.
That's the goal. Thank you for the child life specialist shout out in your book, because I love that, because we often say, make sure you're asking for these types of people and seeing if they're available.
Yes. And the child life specialist that we've worked with at Vanderbilt is wonderful. And she's very enthusiastic and supportive of this project. So she's been involved. We have her reading through the drafts and making sure that she agrees with how we're saying things and what we're doing. And I so appreciate her time and enthusiasm. So that's been really helpful too.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists, parents. We've got a starter kit for you, and clinicians. We even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.